Thank you for being here today, Ravinol. It's great to have you here as we explore the topic of conscious leadership. We're really excited to be talking with you. Ravinol, in his earlier years, was a monk and now is a very successful leader of a business that you set up yourself and have been running for 14, 15 years, I believe, and is a B Corp as well. So we're really excited to explore with you this, this journey that you've been on.
So thank you. Yeah, very nice to be with you.
Yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and the key parts that, I guess there's what you've done to start off with, might be interesting just for us to hear a bit about.
Yeah, I mean, my life, I think, has been a story of, until more the latter part, a story of kind of two halves in a way. I had, from a young age, a very keen interest in business and, I guess, money and kind of materialistic things. And so there was partly drawn to the ideas of success in that way. But I also was equally, and maybe a bit more, drawn towards seeking meaning and substance and a deeper understanding about kind of, what life's all about, and I kind of yo-yoed through those things throughout my life. In my teens, I wanted to be a stockbroker because I was kind of chasing that idea of success. In my school, it was quite interesting. They did a thing called a transition year, which was quite an experimental thing, where before you went on to do your kind of A-levels, you could do this year. It was like personal development, introspection, trips, arts, crafts, poetry, debating, that kind of thing. And I think it kind of gave me a bit of a different, maybe a gap to kind of consider what I wanted to do for the next parts, which were, equivalent of A-levels. I grew up in Ireland, and then going on to university. So I kind of took a different turn, and I did a degree in psychology, which was interesting, but for me, it might sound strange, but I was thinking about it more in terms of how it would help me understand life rather than how it was going to get me a job. And it did that to some extent. But I then ended up, as you said, spending almost all of my 20s as a monk. I met an extraordinary leader, a senior monk who was just such a dynamic personality and had a deep sort of understanding of life, both in terms of the normal life we see around us, but also some of these deeper kind of ideas of understanding of life. And I got the opportunity to travel with him, and that kind of just took my imagination, and I went and I did that for 7 years, and it was quite extraordinary. I spent 2 years in Africa, spent about a year in India, a lot of time in Ireland and England, traveling around. Our kind of work, if you like, was putting on cultural festivals for the public to come along and learn about, some of these topics. So I came out the other end of that about 29 years old with no money and sort of at a crossroads, a real crossroads. And I went into property. My dad advised me because I needed to make some money. So I didn't earn a lot of money in the property. I was working for about £10,000 a year as a sales negotiator, but I kind of was learning about property, and I got a little bit of money from my dad, and I kind of went for it. And it was lucky. It was a lucky period in terms of a rising property market. But quickly, after about 3 years, I got drawn back again towards the work that would be a bit more to do with like public impact or, social impact. And so I ran a mentoring program for 3 years for young people in the Midlands who were at risk of probably getting kicked out of education for different reasons. And matching them with mentors and role models from the community and the business community to try and encourage them to kind of look for a better outcome for their life. And then again, I went back to university. I did an MBA, business masters, and this is kind of the part where the two sides started to come together, which was really great for me, because I think in the world it was similar. As my journey in a way, you had business, and we've all heard this term. I'm sure we've heard it. Somebody does something kind of mean or nasty or quite ruthless, and they go, "Oh, it's just business." And it's an age-old phrase. We don't hear it as much now, maybe, but it was kind of excused because it's just that's business, right? it was almost okay. And then if you did want to do something good in the world, you would just give like a donation, to charity. Like they were very separate. And in a way, you could argue that one of them kind of condoned the other, because it was kind of like you can do whatever you want over here as long as occasionally you do something good over here. So I did my research for my dissertation on venture philanthropy, which was a really interesting idea for me, because it was like business thinking, business approach, but it was trying to focus that on philanthropy and impact. And then that led one step to another to me starting my business Be Inspired Films, which I was just doing a bit of research yesterday, not for this interview, but because it's 15 years since we started this year. I was trying to tie down the origins, make sure I had my research right. So it was 15 years ago, and I started off Be Inspired Consulting, and I was doing work with social purpose organizations, and then the films kind of followed. Looking back, there was a bit of a join the dots as to why it became film, but I'll throw it back to you guys for a bit.
Cool. Wonderful. So I'm still called to go back to a little bit to the monk experience.
Yeah.
Just to share I'd love to hear from you, like what was that like, or what shifted in you, what deepened in you, what shifted in you during that period?
Yeah, I mean, it was it's nice that you ask, actually, because sometimes we can tell these stories and we just, it sounds like it's a bit of a headline more than actually kind of getting into it. It was a really, really significant part of my life. I mean, it's difficult, I guess, for people to imagine, perhaps, but like every day we weren't living away from the world. So we were very much living in the world and operating and engaging and interacting, and, like I say, booking halls and putting on festivals and raising money and so many different things. But the intention of it was never for any personal gain. It really was a life of service. The idea being that, each living being, ourselves included, are made up of, the bit that we see obviously is the body, and we interact with our own and other people's bodies and minds and so on. But the understanding is that the driver or the operator of that body and mind is something distinct. It's something, it's like, you could call it the soul, for example, or the essence, or different traditions might call it different things. But essentially, like we say, my arm, my head, so who's the person? And then obviously the body is temporary and we'll have to give it up. But then the soul can migrate to another body and so on. So we often talk about that. And there's a lot of things we talk about that kind of fit into this, but we may not always, if we're not that way, if we haven't been exposed to it, we may not see how it fits. But like the idea of we're on a journey. So we are on a journey in this life, but the idea is that you're also on a much bigger journey, if you like. So yeah, it was great. I have to say, it was a very high level of commitment. And I think that's ultimately the two questions I get asked the most was, why did you do it? And why did you give it up?
That's what I was curious about. What changed that you gave it up?
Yeah, exactly. I very much thought I would do it for my whole life. That was my intention. And I think what's interesting in retrospect is that I think part of that is the youthful exuberance and sort of idealism and stuff, even within the tradition itself. So it's an Indian tradition, it's Vaishnavism, or devotees of Vishnu or Krishna. And even within that tradition, so they call it the ancient Vedic knowledge from the Vedas, there's a sort of a social structure as well, which is that young men typically would do the first 25 years of their life in education, but it would be material and spiritual education, which is essentially what I became, like a sort of a student monk. But most, if not almost all of them at 25 would get married, and there would be a significant period of their life where they'd be married and they'd be doing work. And then if they wanted, at the latter end of their life, they could also become a bit more renounced from family and kind of get back into spiritual stuff. So even though I was learning about this and everything else, with my gung-ho kind of youthfulness, I thought, and also because I could see other people like my mentor. I thought, oh, I'll just go all the way through. But in reality, it's an extremely high level of commitment. And so I just naturally realized that it was a great experience and it was a great foundation. And it's so much of it I carry with me today. But it wasn't something that, like my own psycho, physical nature wasn't cut out to do it for my whole life. And that just, so I realized, I mean, even for example, I didn't have a shelf, a permanent place just to put some books or anything. So after a while, that kind of traveling around became harder, because I was seeking a sort of a sense of I guess I was seeking a sense of family and these other things, which I'm fortunate now to have, and really I'm glad it was the right time to move on, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. And what's the essence of what you learned and how you shifted during that? I'm curious as to then how that shows up for you today in living a more normal life.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. At first, it was a big shock because I feel like my life since moving out from that kind of fully devotional life has been a constant integration, and is an ongoing integration. I feel like even till now, how to balance and integrate, and that is really the word, because again, even the polarity can be there. Like we talked earlier about business being a separate thing, and then sort of impact being a separate thing. I think also sometimes we can create a polarity between, say, the spiritual and the material, as that they're separate, or that they're sort of somehow opposed to each other, or something like that, which I don't believe they are. But it's a sort of a maturity. It's sort of I kind of love it, because it's like it's this feel like I'm just turned 50 last year, and like I just love how I feel like I'm still learning so much, and that's just such a good feeling, because but I think there was a period where, when I was a monk, maybe, that I felt like I kind of had arrived, or I knew everything to some extent. And I think that's just a maturing, is to realize that actually you may have a sort of a sense of a bigger part of the what's it called, like the canvas, but it's still more and more of it is hopefully becoming clearer as time goes on. So when I first came out, it was a different time in the world, but we didn't watch TV, we didn't listen to the radio, we didn't read newspapers, there was no social media, of course, and so on. So I didn't even know who the Prime Minister was. Like I was completely operating in a different paradigm, which was great. I didn't feel like it was anything I was missing per se. But when I did come back into this, as you say, the broader picture, it was it took quite some time to sort of get around that. I describe it like, when you sometimes see in movies, if there's a spaceship and it's coming back into the Earth's atmosphere, the period where it is coming in, it's very bumpy and bouncing around and so on. So I kind of feel like there was a period of that. But I think as soon as I started my business, I used to have my signature as "yours in service." And I think there's good parts and bad parts to being so readily used to doing things that you're passionate about without any intent for gain, if you like. There's a beautiful part of that, which still is part of me, and is part of our business. And we do obviously charge, and we're profitable, like we do well as a business, but we don't do it for money as the main thing. And I think that kind of carries, like there's a sort of, what we hear from clients, like they can feel that, and we don't do things that we don't believe in or that we're not passionate about. And we only do stuff that we're passionate about and we believe in. So then obviously the fact is, people have to pay for that, but it's we choose what we want to do and why we want to do it. But I suppose the slight potential downside of it is that I had to learn to get balance on, is that your default is kind of just to almost do anything that's kind of good. And so you have to then, you don't, so I suppose in theory you could be taken advantage of a little bit, or you could overgive, so, like, again, it's always about
the balance, right?
Balance. Yeah.
I just something you said there. So why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, well, when I finished my MBA and I was at this another crossroads, I was slightly tempted once again, having spent quite a lot of money on an MBA, to go for some of these consulting roles or banking type roles where, like my teenage self, I was like, maybe now I could do that. But the pull to do something that was of social impact was much stronger. And I think, if I'm really honest, it is a slightly selfish thing. It's because it excites me way more. Like, I get way more excited and I'm more inspired and interested in doing that kind of work. That's kind of the first reason why I do it, really, is because it inspires me. And then but probably it's a circle, isn't it? Because the reason it excites me is because it's a good feeling to be engaged with other people who are doing exciting, innovative, interesting, impactful things in the world, and helping them to increase their impact and tell their stories and so on. So if I'm going to be doing that with any bunch of people, I want to be doing it with that bunch of people. And so that was, and also my that year, well, actually, it wasn't that year. It was some years before. But when my mentor passed away, he passed away quite quickly. He got cancer. In one of the last talks that he did, he was speaking to the youth, and he said, "You have to find something that inspires you. So this shouldn't be some mechanical, your spiritual life shouldn't be a mechanical thing or just some idea that you should do or whatever. You've got to actually find something tangible that really inspires you and do that." And that was kind of where my name Be Inspired came from. I remember sitting in my car talking to a friend of mine who was starting a business at the same time, and we were talking about all our list of names that we were thinking of, and that's where that name came from. And so for me, yeah, it's just helping organizations and people doing really impactful things in the world to tell their stories. That's why we do it.
Lovely, wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah, I wonder what it would be like if everybody on the planet were guided by what inspired them. Well, how would that be? How would it be different?
It's I suppose, as you say that, I did kind of seek it, but it is obviously a very fortunate position as well. It's I think a lot of people probably feel that they don't have that luxury, or they may not be able to, maybe they don't know what it is, or maybe they feel it would be difficult to carve that out in the set of options that they have. But yeah, I definitely feel very fortunate to be able to do that.
I'm thinking very similar to where you were going there, because I think that fear is the opposite of the inspiration, isn't it? That the way you've described it, there's a trust.
Yeah.
There's a acting into what inspires you or us, and maybe like a trust and even a faith that circumstances will support us. And I think when I talk to people, it's often they feel a bit stuck, and there's a fear attached to feeling they have to sit in a position where they're not really inspired, but they're too afraid to leave.
Yeah, definitely. I'm and I remember, I mean, the period when I went back to university to do my MBA, my wife, I got married just a couple of years before that. My wife was working as full-time as a teacher. And even though I had some investments in different things, if she hadn't have been working at that time, and then when I started the business, because it took a little time to get it off the ground, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So, I mean, there's lots of factors that could, I grew up with a lot of self-belief. My parents gave that to me, I guess. Also a lot of self-doubt, a mixture. But I was very determined to always chase things that I wanted to chase. So it's a mixture of things, isn't it? I mean, I worked extremely hard to try and follow the things that I wanted to achieve, but at the same time, I know that doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen. But I feel like if you can, you should try. I really believe that as I get older, that it's better to try and fail than to not try at all. But again, that is easy to say when you're not down to your last 5 pounds or something.
Yes, and clearly we're privileged, but even the listeners of this are probably also in that privileged category.
Yeah.
And my experience of what stops people is conditioning, fear, conditioning that has them be on a hamster wheel. And the conditioning is, I have to do this because, and there's this fixed that has them fixed into a way of leading and or living that actually doesn't have them even explore the possibility of being inspired.
Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? There's steps to it, I guess. It's first of all allowing yourself the space to, or almost allowing yourself the right, I suppose, to even consider it, and then carving out some time, whether it's a retreat or some coaching or whatever it might be, to try and, even if you tell yourself you're not necessarily going to do it, but to explore it, to try and see what it is that inspires you, because it doesn't have to become a business. I mean, necessarily, it could be something that you do on the side. It could be volunteering. It could be whatever. But just tapping into some more of the stuff that sets you alive, that sets you on fire, kind of thing. I think it's really, personally, I think it's just so important. I mean, just because I can't imagine for myself, and for anyone, I suppose it's up to them, but like not having stuff that I was excited about in life, that I really had more of a meaning to me in my life than just all of my duties and stuff. Although you said something in earlier which I thought was very interesting, and I thought it's also a very important balance. You used the word responsibility, I think, Martin, which I thought was good, because I think that's also been part of my becoming more conscious, or maturing or learning, is that there's also a great because there's sort of two sides again. You can go off and just do all the things that you want to do and sort of think about freedom and all of those things, and sometimes, and I have seen it on the spiritual path with people, that can be an excuse to not be responsible, and be an excuse to just kind of opt out or not really do the hard stuff. And so I think responsibility is quite a massive thing. It's a sort of, I mean, my experience of it is, it's that it's a sort of a slight, it appears like a contradictory, like the more you lean into it, the more rewarding it is. The more you're sort of feeling like you're leaning out of it a bit, the more it can, it becomes more difficult or troublesome or whatever.
Do you have an example of that you can think of?
So in my family life, so we have 2 children, 2 boys, 8 and 11. And I think partly because, being a monk, my idea was I would never get involved in family life. Not more because I of the direction I was headed and what I wanted to do. Like, I didn't see it as part of, I saw it as potentially like something entangling or distracting or whatever. So even though I went into it wanting it, I think there was a sort of a conditioning, a deep kind of conditioning that I would be doing my thing, and it would kind of sit alongside that. And I think it's also partly to do with my own upbringing. Like my father was an entrepreneur, very busy, always at work. My mum just did everything at home. So it was kind of a bit of a, again, not so integrated, maybe a bit of separate roles within the family structure. And I think all of this actually came about when I made a documentary which was released, I think, last year or the year before, called "A Girl Can Touch the Sky." I got invited to India to learn about why girls in India have less opportunities for education. And so we decided to make a documentary about it. But the interesting thing was it took 4 years to do. And it became a very, I mean, obviously the main thing was about the gender bias in India and how that comes, because of economic reasons, social reasons, tradition, culture, all of those kind of things, and even some religious kind of reasons. But because I'd had such an integral relationship with India and a lot of that culture, and my wife is Indian, British Indian, it kind of became a really deep learning experience for me as well, in terms of how some of the traditional thoughts about the roles of men and women were also, I was biased by them a little bit. And so it led to a lot of introspection and so on. And I realized that actually I could be much more supportive and more integrate my family life much more. And I was lucky partly because it was the lockdown, so there was a lot more time to be around and slow down, and I did, and I found it to be probably one of the most rewarding things ever. And it also timed with, I spent a lot of time building the business in the beginning, and so I was away a lot, which I think again is one of those sacrifices that sometimes you have to do when you're building something. Unfortunately, now it's much more established. So there's different reasons why it kind of worked in the timing, but I just felt that sometimes it's easy to, if something is so, like, say for example, if it's quite a personal example, but in the past, sometimes if my wife would be upset about something or whatever, I would feel a bit overwhelmed by all of that and just kind of a bit block it out, and just kind of think, well, I'm got so much on my plate, I'm doing so much, I can't really deal with that. Whereas then now, I'm by no means perfect, but I will really try and engage and understand and dialogue and really engage with it in a meaningful, deep way. And it's been much better for us. And then, with the children and everything. So the whole experience has just become so much more integrated. Again, it's back to that word. Yeah.
Integrated, yeah. So picking up on that, can we segue into business then? So really curious about how you bring your awareness into the way that you run your business and integrate those two. And particularly there, we were keen to hear about the practices that you use, what kind of culture you set up, things that listeners may go, oh, that's a good idea, I could try that in my company, my team.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll start off with how it sort of started and sort of how we've tried to evolve it. We've always been very, very clear about our values and our purpose. And so anyone who's come in, whether they've been staff or we also use a lot of associates, depending on different projects. Part of my initial meeting with them is obviously making sure that they're great at what they do, but also really clearly understanding what we do and why we do it. So we'll only really work with people who have those shared values. One thing I'll say, and people I think love working for us for that reason. So even if they normally do a lot of corporate type stuff, they really enjoy the work they do with us because we have a sort of a family mood and atmosphere and so on, but also because, like, for example, TEDx London, so TED Talks in London, we've been their partner for just over 10 years. And so they get to come along and film stuff like that. And it's incredibly interesting stuff. Like you get exposed to all kinds of amazing ideas and often stuff that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. So there's a lot of additional benefits, I guess. But one of the spillovers from being a monk was that I pushed myself very hard, and I would often not always take breaks, or would often work for a very long period of time without really thinking about food or these kind of things. So so I kind of have had to learn over time. Initially I felt like if people were like, oh, we need to have a break and stuff, I couldn't understand it. I mean, that sounds a bit silly, but I would sort of think, oh my God, like it's just getting in the way of our work. Like, why would you, or it's almost so, I don't know, weak or something, you know, or unnecessary. Now that really, if you think about it properly, is ridiculous, but that was just how I was kind of conditioned. I was so absorbed, and I kind of I found it hard at first to appreciate why the team was not good, didn't just operate just like me. And it wasn't even good for me either. And so over a period of time, again, you know, I've become much more sensitive to that, to making sure that the team their needs are looked after, that they're happy, and so on. And then in more recent times, at different periods, we've put time into kind of, you know, creating a sort of a document that really displays our values. But more recently, I went to Hawaii, and they have this term, trying to think of the actual name of it. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's basically a Hawaiian term which means family. And so it might be, I can't think. But I'm planning to put together a new updated version of our kind of company culture, so that it's very much around this idea of family. And I've tried to see also over time what are some of the patterns that pop up again and again for a lot of our associates. And for a lot of them, it's wanting to buy a house. That's what they're working towards. So again, one of the things that I'm offering is support with that, not necessarily financial, but like I've been through that process many times, and I have a lot of experience with it. And so to just try and support them with that as a goal that they may or may not be equipped to deal with, and to try and sort of mentor and coach them towards getting that goal. So that's another thing. So yeah, I guess it's sort of sometimes at periods it's been quite by design. Other times it's kind of sort of by trust, as in that, you know, because it's so much part of my DNA that it kind of just filters out, if you like, through everything we do. But I am aware that the more we formalize it, when we became a B Corp, that was something I learned as well, that there was a lot of things that we were sort of doing loosely, but by becoming a B Corp, we sort of formalized them and made them a bit better, basically, than how we were doing them before. So that process was extremely rewarding.
So let me just then explore. Well, I've got two angles to explore really, but the first one I think is being of service in the world. What aspirations do you have for the impact that you have?
Yeah, it's I feel like, you know, sometimes in the past, I you know, when I was thinking about my business stuff, I would have quite lofty sort of ambitions, you know, and I think we go through periods, like when I made the documentary, that was like a big kind of splash, and it was very much about trying to shift mindsets, or not so much tell people what to think at all, but get people thinking, get people to, because as we said earlier, like people aren't going to change. It's rare that people will change in big jumps. You know, it's about lots of incremental things. So the way I see our role is to find the people who are doing amazing work in different areas, and to help them amplify their message, so that you know, people are kinder, that there's more equity in the world, that people can break out of, or at least shift their thinking on some areas of life where it might be leaning them in a direction that's detrimental, or in my view, like hurting people directly or indirectly. But again, because one of the things I've been very sensitive to, especially having been at one time very definite as a monk in terms of how I felt things were, and even as a monk, you use the word like preaching. I feel like I've kind of become slightly averse to that idea. And now I feel very passionate about exposing people to new ideas. What they do with them is up to them. But I feel like it's really important, and part of our role is to present new ideas to people in interesting ways, so that they can potentially improve themselves and then their impact in the world, I guess.
So if I may just on that, one of the things I'm really curious about is your relationship to service, to being of service. That it seems that you had some shifts or realizations through your monk period to embrace being of service as a way of thinking. I'm curious to know what shifted and when and how, but I was thinking, well, what's your view on how to shift others to realize that being of service is what life should be about, but then that contradicts with what you just kind of said potentially.
Yeah, I think of service is a big, quite broad statement. So of service to what? So I guess everyone is of service to something. Whether it's, just yourself, just your family, just your area, your country, your football team, whatever. It's like an extending, so I suppose it's what's your worldview to some extent, in terms of how you then define what being in service means to you. Because people who, don't use such a sort of provocative example, but Hitler was absolutely, totally immersed in his idea of service to his nation, for example. So it's not just about being in service. I guess it's really important. What are you in service towards? And I suppose I won't say that I'm anywhere near as conscious of it as I was when I was a monk, and I have to, practice, I guess, being mindful about it. And sometimes I do that much more than other times. But my feeling of the greatest service that I can sort of plug into is the common united nature that we all have as living beings, as something incredibly magical and wonderful. And when we experience that, or a taste of that, it's very difficult to kind of forget it, if you like. So the interesting thing is so I suppose my greatest hope for people is that they get a taste of that kind of, the feeling that you get from that kind of service to something greater than yourself. And it is something that you can't really buy. So you'll see with a lot of, maybe again, this is also my bias about the bubbles we move in, but I feel like a lot of the super wealthy people, cynically you can say that, oh yeah, they give money or time or whatever because it's financially beneficial, and that's partly true. But they also, like, when you have got all of that financial and material stuff, like, I think a lot of them realize that actually there's much greater pleasure in giving. And so they often really do a lot of it. And I feel like there's also some studies which have been done that actually you get much greater happiness doing the same thing if you're not paid for it than if you're paid for it. So I think that for me, it's about trying to find a way to make money in the world, and sort of, not have to be fearful, like we talked about earlier, but then figure out also beyond, like, that isn't the goal. Like, that beyond that, what is it that it's sort of like enlightened self-interest in a way. Like, there's no better feeling than wanting the best and wanting love for all living beings. I mean, it might sound a bit, but like it really is, if you think about it, like, because we are living a living being. What would we wish for ourselves? We would wish the absolute best. So why would we not want the absolute best for everyone? I think it's about seeing them as kind of, as that there's a connection, or as soon as we see the separation, then it's very easy to find a million reasons why we're in competition, we're in opposition, there's a scarcity, we've got to grab what we can, we're just defending ourselves, so it's a sort of, it's there's a theory, and then there's trying to engage in practices that help you to really feel like you have some realization of it. And so I feel super, super fortunate spending that time as a monk. That realization, or at least the attempt to realize that, became very deeply imprinted in me. And so I feel that was a big blessing. Yeah.
I really resonate with what you're saying, all the way from your comments around Hitler or ISIL, or what you can say. Great, very clear sense of purpose, very clear sense of being in service of something, but there is harm done, and I think what you're alluding to there is, you pointed very clearly that if there's a sense of separation, then we can do harm, and when we have that sense of connectedness, we're less inclined to do that.
Yeah. And that you almost have to create the sense of separation to be able to cause harm, because otherwise, if you see the commonality or the connection, then essentially you're kind of harming yourself. Yeah. And actually, maybe on reflection, then part of our mission is to tell stories that help engender that sense of connectedness. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Do you have any final questions, Gina?
No, I they would not be profound at this point, so I like ending on that note.
Yeah. I think the thing, just to sum up on this last point then for me, is that I think we're in a world at the moment where we're increasingly starting to realize our actions have an impact on the planet. It's like, there's so much awareness now going on about 1.5 and what's causing that. Everyone is starting to go, okay, petrol car, plastic, my individual actions, from what I now hear, are actually causing an impact. And for decades, we've not really associated our individual impact actions to that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's happening more.
That is a great, it's a great that we're becoming aware of it, but I also feel it's, just to share a few final thoughts, if that's okay. It's equally a good thing, and it's heading in the right direction. But I think, and I'll use myself as the example because, and then maybe others can relate, but it also kind of begs an uncomfortable question, which is, we've become so accustomed and used to certain things and comforts and stuff and all of that, how much are we individually, like, because we can see there's big statistics and big trends and stuff, and we think, oh, it's the government's responsibility or it's the companies or whatever, and of course it's everyone's responsibility, but like, how much am I personally willing to have less in order to contribute to that? And I think that so the reason I'm using myself is because I don't want to sort of say, but like, you know, we move in like these kind of worlds and everything, but the feeling is like that we want it all. Like we want all the benefits of material opulence and growth, you know, in our businesses and all of that, and we want to feel like we're sort of on the right side and everything, which is good. But I'm just saying, like, that maybe there's a sort of a harsh reality that that we're kind of just blowing on the boil a bit. You know, like, you know, you hear about conscious capitalism and B Corp, which we're part of and stuff, which is a quantum leap better than the way it used to be. But I really do wonder, like, if any of these things are even a crumb near enough to what's needed. You know, as much as I hate to say that, but yeah, let's wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the journey of being more conscious as a human and as a leader, is to face up to some of those things, to face up to what role are we playing, what do we actually need to play as a role in this world. Yeah, and there might be some hard choices for us to make individually and collectively as we move forward.
I hope there'll be more research. Like, I heard about a thing the other day about degrowth. And so some of these are great ideas, but I suppose at some point, if it were ever to become a reality, someone would have to create a roadmap and a modeling and all of that to see. Because even if everyone was on board with it, how would it actually work? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Ravinol. It's been great to hear some of your story and your sharing. Really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Ravinol.